It looked like Germany's answer to the American B-17, a sleek, predatory four-engine bomber that, on paper, could reach London, Moscow, or the Urals and bring the war home to anyone. But it had one problem. It liked to set itself on fire. This was the Heinkel HE-177 Greif, the Luftwaffe's only real attempt at a long-range heavy bomber. Crews called it the Reich's Lighter. To Ernst Heinkel, it was a marvel of engineering. To the men who flew it, it was a death trap that burned at 30,000 feet. The story started in 1936, when Germany's Air Ministry issued a challenge it called Bomber A. They wanted a machine that could carry 2 metric tons of bombs more than 3,000 kilometers, faster than 500 kilometers an hour, and still be able to dive bomb its target. To the generals, it sounded like strategic dominance. To engineers, it sounded like witchcraft. Then came Ernst Heinkel, short, stubborn, and absolutely sure that aviation history belonged to risk-takers. He'd been building airplanes since the First World War, and he treated every design like a personal race against gravity. Heinkel was famous for 2 things: his speed-obsessed engineering and his volcanic temper. He once told a colleague, "If it looks right, it will fly right." A perfectionist and a showman, he wanted his company's aircraft to look like the future. So when the Air Ministry asked for a bomber that could outrun its own problems, Heinkel didn't hesitate. Germany had no true heavy bomber, no B-17s, no Lancasters, and that became an obsession for the Luftwaffe. They wanted a single aircraft that could bomb like a Stuka, sprint like a fighter, and still fly halfway across a continent. If it worked, it would be the ultimate weapon of blitzkrieg. The project was green-lit. The name chosen, HE-177 Greif, the Griffin. Ernst Heinkel hated waste. He wanted a bomber that looked fast even standing still, clean, aerodynamic, beautiful. 4 separate engine nacelles like the American B-17 created drag. So Heinkel gambled on something radical: 2 massive nacelles, each holding 2 engines bolted together and driving a single propeller through a shared gearbox. In theory, that gave the speed of a twin-engine plane with the power of a 4-engine one. In practice, it created a nightmare. The DB-606 power unit, basically 2 Daimler-Benz engines crammed side by side, ran so hot that the crankcases literally melted oil lines. Mechanics joked it was 2 engines trying to set each other on fire. Pilots would glance out at the wings and see shimmering heat haze licking from the nacelles before takeoff. Still, Heinkel pushed ahead. The Air Ministry demanded results, and the prototype looked magnificent. Smooth, low-slung, fast. But under those wings, a fire was waiting to start. When the first prototypes rolled out in 1939, they looked spectacular. Long wings, smooth fuselage, shark-like lines. But inside, the Greif was already betraying its crew. The new DB-606 power units, 2 Daimler-Benz 601 engines, mounted side by side and sharing a single gearbox, were supposed to be genius. Each nacelle delivered almost 2,700 horsepower. But to squeeze that power into such a small space, engineers crammed them under tight cowlings with almost no airflow. The result? Instant heat buildup. Fuel lines baked until they cracked, oil pumps overheated, fires broke out before the aircraft left the runway. Heinkel's own test pilots begged him to drop the coupled engine idea. One memo described the engines as 2 hearts beating in a fever. Even senior Luftwaffe officials grew nervous. At Rechlin Test Center, mechanics joked that the bomber didn't need bombs. It would burn its targets just by flying over them. But the Air Ministry refused to back down. They still demanded the impossible: a 4-engine heavy bomber that could dive bomb like a Stuka. Heinkel warned them that forcing such a large airframe into a dive would tear it apart. He was overruled. The HE-177 had to dive. The bomber's development dragged through the first years of the war. While Heinkel pleaded for design changes, the Luftwaffe needed results fast. Factories at Rostock Marienhalle and Oranienburg turned out small production runs of A0 and A1 models, each a patchwork of fixes. Cooling ducts were widened, new pumps installed, cowlings reshaped, but nothing stopped the heat. Engines seized in flight, entire airframes were lost to onboard fires. The ministry's patience wore thin. Inspector General Ernst Udet, a former ace from World War I, called the aircraft a technical scandal. After his death in 1941, Erhard Milch took over aircraft procurement and pushed production anyway, arguing that Germany couldn't wait for perfection. By 1943, the A5 variant finally reached frontline units, slightly faster, a little stronger, still cursed. In the rush to get bombers in the air, crews were sent up with aircraft that barely passed inspection. Ground teams kept fuel trucks parked beside the runways, ready to extinguish the next one that caught fire. The Greif went to war mostly on the Eastern Front and over the seas. At first it seemed promising, range enough to hit railway hubs, payload enough to damage convoys. But the reality was grim. On one mission in early 1943, a formation sent to strike Velikiya Luki lost more aircraft to engine fires than to Soviet fighters. Pilots carried fire extinguishers in their laps. Flight engineers learned to leave inspection hatches open mid-air, hoping the wind would cool the engines. The bomber also saw service in anti-shipping roles, carrying HS-293 guided bombs against Allied convoys in the Bay of Biscay. Some successes were recorded. One strike damaged the British troop ship Rhonda, but the attrition rate was catastrophic. For every convoy hit, several HE-177s went down in flames before reaching base. By the time the Allies were leveling German cities with thousands of sorties a night, the Luftwaffe's own heavy bomber fleet could barely keep 50 Greifs operational. The dream of a German strategic bomber force was dying, burned out by its own engines. By the time the Greif reached squadrons like KG-40, everyone already knew its reputation. Crews nicknamed it the Reich's Lighter, or just the Flaming Coffin. Veterans remembered standing on the runway at Bordeaux-Mérignac, watching a line of 177s start their engines one by one. The moment the throttles opened, blue fire would lick from the exhaust stacks, sometimes crawling across the nacelles before the bombers even rolled. Ground crew carried extinguishers like rifles. Flight engineer Hans Wegner later said, "When we took off, we didn't wonder if a fire would start. We wondered when." Inside, the noise was unbearable, two coupled engines hammering out of sync, the fuselage shuddering as mechanics shouted over the intercom. If one engine failed, the vibration could rip the mount apart. Many crews didn't wait for orders, they bailed out at the first smoke. Still, some loved the machine's grace. When it worked, it flew smooth and fast, faster than most Allied heavies. But every pilot knew that beauty came with a fuse. Heinkel never gave up on the idea. By 1944, he built the HE-177B, a true four-engine redesign that finally solved the fire problem. No more coupled engines, no more cooking oil lines, and test pilots said it flew beautifully. But by then, the war had turned. Germany's factories were bombed, fuel was scarce, and the Luftwaffe was fighting to survive. The heavy bomber dream had become a relic of another war. One Germany no longer had the sky to fight. Only a handful of 177Bs were completed. None saw combat. Ernst Heinkel watched from the sidelines as his company was absorbed deeper into the Nazi war machine. He'd long clashed with Erhard Milch, who controlled aircraft production, and by 1942 he'd been pushed out of daily management of his own firm. After the war, the Allies banned him from aircraft design under denazification rules. His name, once synonymous with speed and innovation, vanished from aviation headlines. He turned instead to making scooters and small cars in West Germany, the kind of machines that never catch fire at 20,000 feet. He died in 1958, still insisting that the Greif could have worked if only they'd let him build it properly.